All right. We should be live. Yeah,
All right.
we did it. I clicked the buttons.
Great, great job with all the technical work there, Sean
Thank you.
Kelly.
Thank you.
So, this is the Stream of Truth. We are so glad you are here. I am Dr. Tassel Faith Shamebrook.
And I am Mr. Sean Kelly.
And today, what an interesting topic we have. Something I'm still fascinated by. Twin flame stages explained. What are the twin flame stages?
And this is our, just as like a disclaimer, this is our experience and experience that we've encountered with some of our clients, perhaps, or other friends, things like that. So that's sort of where we've based this from. It's probably possible to repeat some of these stages or to cycle back and forth between them a bit. And it's not all inclusive. There may be other stages that we didn't catch here. So this is our attempt, though. I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, exactly. So this is our overview of potential twin flame stages, but you may or may not experience all of them, or there may be some other ones that are unique to your experience. So we're going to go through basically 7 twin flame stages. We're going to share our own personal story for each stage. And then also for each stage, talk about goodness, what can we do to move as peacefully as possible through these stages? So some tips and strategies for each stage.
Yeah.
Would you like to start with the first stage?
Sure. So usually at a younger age, you have this sort of knowing, usually around after puberty, you start to have a knowing that there's somebody somewhere for you. You start to feel like that. Part of that is amplified from the stories you start to pay attention to, like the romantic stories, the love stories, as well as like the puberty coming in and the sexual desires forming and stuff like that too. So it's very easy to like feel very naturally in that orientation. And often what we end up doing is sort of creating for ourselves the person or the persona of the person that we believe is out there. And this is sort of how we start to form all of our romantic relationships with people. We're sort of comparing them to this person. Do they line up? No. But maybe they line up enough where I can mold them a bit. And so we often start to do that, like whether we're totally conscious of it or not, we start to do that. But all the time as we're doing that, we usually have this knowing that I'm not sure that this is ever going to really work. Maybe we'd really like it to for various reasons, a lot of like rational, logical reasons, like we have kids together, or something like that, or I don't know what I would do. There's a lot of uncertainty. But we still have this sort of knowing that this person that we're with isn't the right person, or the people we're seeing are not the right people. They're not but yeah, so we have that sort of image that we build. And then that's why later when we start to understand that that's how we're manifesting our partners and stuff, that's when we start to shift and call out for particular traits, like when we're looking for our partners, start to manifest particular types of traits, or particular types of things, and we build those from our biases. So it's all very unique and all of that. And I believe personally that a lot of this is a draw. We think we're looking for the external person. What we're truly looking for is ourself, and it's through finding the other person we eventually come to know ourselves and realize it wasn't ever really about the other person. But that's, I think, the full scope of what that whole relationship is for. And the foundation of it is we believe we find ourselves in others. And that's a confused approach. And this is meant to show us that through this harmony that we eventually will encounter.
Awesome. Do you want to tell more of your own personal story around this stage?
That was basically how I experienced it. So I had a lot of desire to try to maintain relationships because I felt that it was the right thing to do. So notice that it was more of morals for me. It was more like I felt stuck because I thought that the right thing to do was to stay and sacrifice my what I felt I was called to do, right?
Yeah.
And so I was sort of making that decision daily, more or less, right? Like every time it would come up in my mind, I would be like, yeah, well, I feel like I feel like I should stay. I feel like I have to stay. And also things weren't, they weren't horrible, or anything there, so it wasn't like there was a huge urgency, component in mine either. Like I was treated quite well, it wasn't until my awakening that things really got topsy-turvy, and that's all because of the awakening, right? And what I like to remember in that scenario, if you're with somebody and you're having an awakening, just as an aside, remember during your awakening that you're the one who's changed overnight. Overnight, you're the one who's changed and introduced this whole new dynamic to the relationship. There's going to be this person trying to wrap their head around this new expression that you're now, this new you, really. That is probably, if it's just happened, is probably quite unstable as well in various ways. A lot of confusion and old programming still there, but new insights there. And so lots of instability, and emotional instability and irritability and different things, sensitivity. And so they're confused and they can express that in different ways. Like they could get angry, they can get defensive, whatever. So it's important to let them off the hook a bit, because you're the one who shifted overnight. They didn't ask for any of that from you. You just brought that up, and now they're dealing with it the best they can. And it's a hard thing to deal with when someone that you see as your partner is suddenly a new person, right? More or less is how they would experience that, right?
That is wonderful, a wonderful suggestion. And it makes me think that I'd like to have a conversation with my ex-husband around that, because I don't think I ever really saw it in that way that you just described, that it was very, I'm sure, difficult for him, what I was going through. Yeah, that's really beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, so, just try to keep that in perspective a little bit, because as difficult as it is for you, the more unstable and changed you are from it, the more instability you're inviting into their world. Of course, right?
Of course.
And it's going to show, if you have kids, it's going to show up in all these different ways.
Yes.
So it's not that they're excused for every wrong they may commit or something against you in those moments, but just try to understand that they haven't seen what you've seen. They don't
have compassion for what they're experiencing. It's like we talked about yesterday. I think if one of us is bringing up something that could be a bit triggering for the other person, that we just hold an awareness and compassion and space for that. So same idea. It's just common sense.
Yeah.
But sometimes, because we're going through something really intense, we might just not be focusing on that. But that's so beautiful to keep all of that in the forefront.
I want to share as well, back to the original topic, which the someone you were desiring to meet. In my personal experience, I used to joke about this with some of my friends, that I would be with a doctor model, and you were a model and are a doctor, and it's hilarious.
That is really funny.
It's hilarious now.
You really said that?
I used to say it.
That was really a thing.
I used to say that I would be with a doctor model. And I used to say stuff like, obviously look at me. And people would just be very perturbed by it. And I used to do that. Like, I used to tell people, I used to say stuff like I deserved a tip, or I deserved a discount because of my face, or something like that. When I was like teenagers stuff.
You do have a beautiful face, so
I think, well, so personally, I think my face is average. That's about how I see it. So that's why it's funny to me, is that I'm taking my average looks and just telling other people that I look better than I do, and then the social awkwardness that unfolds with that is always delightful to me.
I wouldn't say anything about you is average.
Oh,
all amazing.
But yeah, so I used to say that, and I was joking with my friends, but that's really what I sort of was thinking. I was thinking like an intellectual, attractive person. So I just said model in my mind, not that, I'm not trying to like, what's like, objectify women or anything. But that's what I was thinking about. I was a teenager when I was like forming these ideas, right? And when I was saying that stuff, and I sort of forgot about that whole thing until after we met. And I didn't even know you were a model at first until a bit later. And then I found out, and that's when it came back to me, and I just laughed about it. It was just so silly that it happened that way.
Yeah. In a law of attraction way, you brought it in.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I have a similar experience to a degree with you in that, well, just to back up, I did always feel, excuse me, that there was this life partner out there for me. I just felt it. And I was impatient for sure a lot of the time. After my divorce, I thought, oh, good. Hopefully now I've created space for my amazing life partner to show up. And you showed up, let's see, about 3.5, 4 years after my divorce. So it didn't take that long. But I also sometimes would pray about my partner, and I did have certain traits that I was excited about him possibly having. And there were also two specific things around him. One was I asked Spirit to bring me the one with the most light. And I might start to tear up, but your light is just amazing. So that was completely,
I am honored. Thank you.
Received. And then the second part, which is interesting, is that I really felt my life partner was going to be a walk-in.
And when did you hear about that term?
Gosh, probably like over the past, like maybe 10 years ago or so, maybe a little bit more. Yeah, I was kind of familiar with it for a while. And then I just felt, and I remember having this prayer ceremony with Spirit around this, and it was actually before your date of your walk-in, and I could feel that he wasn't on the planet yet. That's what it felt like. And I felt like I was calling out to him to come.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But it's super interesting that when we met, I could tell your light was stratospheric. So I was like, oh my gosh, that came true. And then eventually you told me about your walk-in experience. I was like, oh my God, that's what I felt would be in my life partner.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Interesting. Super cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess I'll just briefly say what a walk-in is.
Yes.
Um,
Thank you.
Probably should do that just because it is a bit of an esoteric concept. Um, Basically, a walk-in is an agreed upon swap of or addition of consciousness into the mind body spirit complex. And so my understanding is that Sean has committed to this vessel, so Sean is there, but what he does is that consciousness steps aside and goes into a period of stasis, because it's that energy is still committed to this vessel until the end of this incarnation. So there's no suffering there. It's like sleeping, basically. So Sean's sleeping, and then I believe the Ka consciousness came in and merges with that. And so because that energy is still there in the stasis, it's accessible. All the energetic body remains the same. Ka brings in the new biases, the new distortions, like overlapping the energetic body. And basically there's a swap that takes place. And the way that it happens, it all feels very congruent, yet at the same time it feels like you are not at all the person you were the day before. And there's a distinct feeling of newness to everything. And your preferences suddenly change. You could have diet changes. It doesn't feel like you're a new entity, but like right away, but you start to remember that that's what's happened. As you go on, it starts to make just more sense. And then as you go through your inner guidance, you'll start to learn more of if that did happen, etc. So it's basically just a new soul coming in. In my case, Sean, this is my working understanding of what happened. Sean was done here, and in a sort of moment of desperation, he opened his heart, and somehow, probably naturally, or I don't know, and had a Kundalini awakening. And in that awakening, he decided that he was ready to stop, and that he wanted. I think he felt basically that he couldn't do the job properly, and so then that's when I think Ka came in.
So amazing. Could we do a show where I interview you about this whole experience?
Yeah, we could talk about it, and I'll give as much information as I can. Some of it's shifted a little bit. So like when I first experienced Ka, I didn't understand what it was fully.
Yeah.
Where they were coming from or what. It was all very mysterious, and so I talked about it a little bit. So some of my thoughts on it have changed and shifted a bit.
Yeah.
But that's the nature of this type of relationship forming, I think. Yeah. So I'll talk about it as much as I can, and try to clarify anything. And yeah. Awesome. So now what I think is happening basically is I now have access to the Ka social memory complex, which I believe works with Ra, and then also Sean was a starseed and had other social memory complexes tied into him, which is why I feel such an allness as far as origin goes. Mm-hmm. I feel a resonance with all, almost.
Yeah.
Just because of all that different layerings of experience and connections in consciousness in both past and future existences.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I think we get back into the science. I know that stuff's really interesting to me. I get weird talking about it about myself, but it's probably the best way to share it. And I'm sure people have experienced it and didn't even understand what it was. And
yeah. Okay, so we just said the first state, the first potential. Again, you may not experience this stage, but it's possible. So the first one is that there's an inner knowingness that you're destined to meet this amazing person. Okay, the second stage is you meet this person and it's amazing. And at the same time, you are more than likely in old relational patterns, and a lot of shadow is coming up. So maybe I'll just describe more personally what my experience was.
I was going to ask, before you do that, could you describe what you mean by relational patterns? Like,
yeah.
What are some examples of relational patterns that you'd stick with, that you'd come into this relationship with, do you think?
Great question. So the first thing that comes to mind is my communication patterns, as well as maybe my energetic patterns. So communication wise, oh my goodness, I had a lot to learn. I was really in sort of old 3D communicative habits where, for instance, if something happened between us where I felt uncomfortable, I would want to talk about it. And I think there would be an energy of, can we shift this? It's very difficult for me. It was like immediately other directed, you directed. If I was uncomfortable in our interaction, I wanted to talk to you about it. Yep. And not maybe 100% that it was just you, but that was more the direction, I think.
And on the opposite side, I was the opposite of that. I was perceiving everything that you were saying as like an affront on my sovereignty, because I was perceiving it all as judgment and you trying to change me and trying to get me to feel guilty and stuff like that. So I was basically over protecting, over balancing to because I had experienced issues in that area before.
Yeah, right? So that was your old relational.
My old pattern was to feel like people are trying to manipulate me by complaining about me all the time, right?
And it's super interesting in these twin flame divine union pairings that these issues, these stories always seem complementary.
Yeah, they
line up so well.
Yeah, if you talk about them both, honestly, there's almost always like something that's bugging you is going to be bugging them also in some way.
Yes. It's amazingly all lined up.
Because you're both going to work on that together.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that second stage that we're talking about, it's so wonderful to meet. It's great. And at the same time, so much is starting to come up really to be looked at. You can also still actually be in your old relationships and stuff, right? Like you may not really have the space, but you still feel the pull and stuff like that too. So it starts to, you might even be married with children potentially.
It can, I'm sure for some it's part of the thing that motivates them to pursue single or separation, right?
Yes.
I would never recommend like a affair type scenario in this type of relationship. It's just too bananas.
Yeah.
You won't be able to give the person that you see as your twin the appropriate attention and care if you're like sneaking around and doing all that stuff. There won't be a purity, and they'll have trouble as well watching you do these activities and trusting you, most likely.
Yeah. Okay, and then the third stage, do you want to hit that one?
Yes, ma'am. You enter the honeymoon shitstorm period.
I just love that so much.
Yeah, this is where you have like it's almost like a roller coaster of
Yes.
like good highs, low lows. Some of your unique quirks that you each have will cause uh, conflict, challenge, whatever, weird situations. Um, Probably be some crying involved.
Oh my goodness. A lot of crying.
Yeah,
On my part.
I've
Did
cried.
you
I've
cry?
cried. I've
Did you
cried
cry
here
at
and
all?
there.
You did you cry?
I I've cried. I'm sure. Yeah,
Did you cry during that period? I'm just curious.
I cry most days,
Oh, okay.
but I don't tend to cry in the middle of interactions as much.
Yeah, that's interesting. Why do you think that is?
I'm presuming it's not acceptable for men to cry, and so it's
Ah,
just not. It's not. Just doesn't seem to come up in the middle of the
that's
stuff.
so interesting.
Um, but usually I'm crying like either I'm like really diving into a pain that I noticed and like
Yeah,
feeling into it a lot, and I just start
yeah,
crying.
yeah.
Uh, or it's a gratitude thing.
Ah,
So it's usually both chosen experience. Like it's not like I just suddenly get upset by the environment and stuff like that. It's usually like
okay.
I've been reminded of something and invited to jump into it, and I decide to.
Yeah.
That's when I'll do it. But in conversation, I'm usually trying to be. I think I step back a little or something.
Yeah. Um, a little reserved, maybe.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's just the
Yeah.
natural orientation. I don't have a problem. I know that crying's not an issue. I don't
Yeah.
have an issue with men crying personally. I think it's. I still know that society in general uh, has not appreciated that type of behavior from men
Yes. Yes.
in the past. I think that's changing. A lot of men are being celebrated when they're emotional and stuff like that.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I don't. I think that's all changing. It shows courage, I think, and strength. So I think the habit is just very ingrained in me because my views don't really align with the habit.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So it's something that'll probably shift over time.
Yeah. And I, of course, I'm very reserved in these intimate conversations.
Yeah, yeah.
I never cry.
It's like it's like uh, it's like pulling teeth trying to get you to tell me how you feel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
And it is interesting because for most of my life, I didn't cry. I think I was very reserved in some ways and super disconnected from my emotions. And I, even during my very painful divorce custody situation 5 years ago, I didn't cry. And I think it was partly because I felt if I went there, I would never get out of the dark, sad feelings.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good
yeah,
point because the ego tells us it's not safe. It's
safe.
uncomfortable.
There's
It's not safe.
too much there. And I also felt, I
Yeah.
don't know, I felt really scared to cry by myself
Mm.
because I thought I would just be in such despair and then I'd be alone
And you wouldn't
it
be
would
able to
just be
handle it
awful.
or something.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to handle it. So I don't know if maybe part of the reason I've cried a lot more recently is maybe it's backed up crying energy from my whole life. I don't know.
That could make sense. I mean,
Maybe
we do
I'm just letting
store.
out a lot
Yeah, could be.
of that energy that,
It could be.
interesting. Would
And
it be okay if I share one example between you and I of kind of in a way a funny anecdote about part of our shitstorm about time?
Sure, sure,
That
yeah, sure.
I just thought it'd be fun to give a specific example.
Okay.
So Sean is very integrated in his higher self and just in sixth density in general. So the concept of time for you is very different from the more human experience of time. And during this period, I said to you something like, could we have a weekly Zoom call, maybe on Friday nights, like a date night on Zoom? And and I don't want to speak for you. Do you want to explain how you received that?
So it's important to say first that at that time, I was not yet fully calibrated
back
around
to like humanness in a way.
So what I can do now is I can perceive unity consciousness or timelessness, but I can also step into the human stuff and perceive it properly there too. But I do have to sort of adjust here and there, right? And so the adjusting wasn't happening properly back then. And so when you like, when you would say stuff to like schedule stuff in the future,
right,
I would literally be like, there is no moment there. There is no
future.
This is the moment.
Right.
So how I didn't know how to do it.
Yes.
I was like, you can give me a time and maybe I'll be there. If the stars align, I'll be there.
Right.
Or not, that's sort of how I couldn't see time properly.
Yeah, which makes sense.
It's funny to think about now. Like now I still see time differently, but what I am understanding more is like I'm setting an intention for a particular thing to happen at a particular moment, and I'm setting an intention for it, and whether it happens or not, I'm not trying to predict the future. I'm just setting an intention to do a thing at a time.
And I think the way that I
was able to
the way that I received all of that went right into my old relational story of men not showing up for me or not being cared about, which is a very old theme for me. So when you communicated that, I just felt I was just in my old story, and it brought up so much for me.
What I'm happy about how that was handled for both of us was that I didn't just tell you what you wanted to hear. I would openly say these things to you.
Yeah.
And say, I don't know how to do that, and I don't see it like that. And I would try to explain my perspective, and we would have a dialogue about it. And it wouldn't always be grasped, like, because we're coming from just different orientations on the concept itself. So luckily, though, in those cases, like, you were able to be very patient.
Oh, good.
I think patient enough that I knew that you were doing your best to be patient about it. And like, so, but I also had to be patient because I thought you were asking me to do the impossible. So I'm trying to like teach you or something, right?
There is no time, Tassel. There is no time.
Yeah. So I'm like, you have to see the timelessness.
You need to make this leap of consciousness.
And so I was doing that thing where I'm like trying to adjust you because I think that that's the route, but so I was
right. And maybe in a way that might have been an older relational pattern for you.
Right, exactly. So you can use these old relational patterns with these new concepts, and so it seems like I'm doing a good thing. Oh, I want to help her see eternal, infinite time, or that perspective. That sounds like a benevolent thing to do, but really I'm trying to do that because I'm having discomfort because we're not seeing it the same.
Harmonizing.
And so that whole thing was really
so this third stage is like the meeting of each one's relational patterns. They each come head to head, and it can be really intense.
Thank you, Mystic Bloomer, and hello, Michael. Peace.
Hi.
Thank you for tuning in. Mystic Loomer said this is a good live. That is
Oh,
excellent.
awesome.
Thank
We're
you.
so glad you're here. If you have any questions or anything, let
Yeah,
us
feel
know.
free to leave them in the comments. We'll get, or in
Yeah.
the chat or comments after, and we'll get to them as soon as we can.
Awesome.
Should we go to the next?
Let's go to number 4.
Okay.
Is that you?
No, I think it's you.
Okay. Oh, you're right. Sorry. Okay. Okay. Oh my goodness. Number 4 is the separation stage. And not every twin flame relationship is going to experience this, but I do believe a lot do. The separation stage where you're not communicating. Our separation stage lasted 9 weeks. And I should say I was still sending you some messages on Facebook Messenger. Just little kind of sweet little things. But we were not communicating back and forth. And so I believe that this separation stage is basically orchestrated by our higher selves in order to just take us out of the daily interaction with each other and really invite us to do some inner work.
Yeah. Can I add to that?
Yes, please.
So the way that I like to think of it is, I've said before that twins are like sacred mirrors, and you can only look in the mirror for so long at first, because you're seeing what is shown to the self in the Giza Egyptian pyramids during the resurrection, or the initiate phase of becoming an adept at magic. Back when they would use those pyramids, they'd put people in the queen's chamber, and they'd basically put them into a sort of trance meditative state where they'd stare at their self. And this is how they heal themselves and come out of that initiated and as a crystallized being.
Yeah.
So to do that here in this illusion, we have to encounter the sacred mirror, the accurate reflections. But basically what happens is, in here, we don't typically have the capacity to quickly move through all of the healing and integrations that we're doing.
Yeah.
So basically, the more we stare into the mirror, the more of ourselves we're seeing, the more and the more stuff of that we've repressed, the more difficult it will be to move through it. And you get to a point, likely, where it's too much for some reason. Yeah. And that's when that happens. So basically, it's the broader perspective to have on it, I think, is to understand that somebody's at their limit, basically. Someone's at their limit, and everyone's doing their best. So someone's at their limit, and there's had to be this space. If they're at their limit, chances are you are also. So really what it is like you said, time to reflect, time to spend time with yourself, not focus so much on the them and the stuff between you and what they did and what they said and what that meant, and did it mean this, and are they coming back, and trying not to focus so much on that, focusing on healing yourself. And then I think what ends up happening is both of you guys end up sort of doing that in a harmonious sort of way. And then when the timing is right, I'm sure reconnection.
Yes. And you.
Oh, we have some questions as well.
Oh, okay.
So we could do that after.
Maybe, okay, at the end.
Yeah, well, after you finish your thought that you were just about to, and then I'll read the questions.
Okay. So
sure.
What I'll just share around this stage is that something that was super helpful was sort of in the way that it happened. You initiated the separation, and we didn't really talk about it. So I was left feeling abandoned.
Yeah.
And of course, that was really painful. And when I really felt into it, so my human didn't want to feel into it at all. My human wanted to get on a dating site and go party and just forget about all of this. But my higher consciousness knew that was not the path. um, so I really ended up feeling deeply into my feelings of being abandoned. And then, oh my goodness, it was very clear all this other stuff came up from all these other relationships with men originating in my family of origin. And I had not looked at that at all in all the shadow work I had done previously. So it was kind of interesting. I was like, I didn't even know that was there in my energy field. So I am grateful to you and to what happened that all transpired, because I was really able to see a huge chunk of my shadow, feel it, and I believe clear it.
Yeah.
And then what I also want to say is that that separation period also became a huge initiation for me into self-love. That was very much the guidance I could feel, that this was a time to really learn how to love myself, how to be with myself, how to enjoy my own company.
Yep.
Because before we met, I was in this almost waiting period for my life partner to show up after my divorce. I was just waiting, kind of waiting. And I wasn't really fully present in my own life and loving myself and enjoying my own company while I was single. I wasn't. I was waiting.
Yeah, and usually when we're waiting too, we tend to try and distract ourselves.
Yes.
Because we think that we're just trying to be patient, and we're trying to distract ourselves. We usually will do a lot of stuff, or we'll do less stuff. Like we'll do more lazy stuff, like watch TV or play video games, stuff like that.
And I was just very future oriented. Oh, my life is really gonna take off when my life partner comes in. That's how I was seeing it. So this 9-week period was a huge initiation for me into just really finally being present in my own life and not waiting. And then the last thing I want to say about that period too is it also became such a great time to reflect on everything that had happened between us, my own behaviors, and what I could see where I wanted to go. And I think, integrated deeper levels of unconditional love, unconditional acceptance, and unconditional trust during this time, because I was not resonant with my behavior before that. And I really wanted to grow in those aspects. And that time period gave me the container to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was awesome, but really painful too.
So, Research Clue has a question. They say, can you talk more about the 5D interactions during separation? So I'm thinking what that means is experiences of each other's energy in some fashion.
I wanted to bring that up. I'm so glad that question came up.
Well, that's probably why it came up.
Do you want to talk about on your side what you experienced?
Yeah, I would have songs show up in the environment that were songs that you and I had talked about, or there had been some interaction with. Those would show up a bunch. Sometimes certain birds, cardinals I associated with you a bit, with my grandfather as well. But because you would always mention cardinals to me, I ended up associating them with you as well. So I'd see that type of stuff. Sometimes I would have these experiences where it felt like it almost felt like I was torturing you, and I would have these just really guilty, difficult experiences on occasion. Often when I was in the shower, which is interesting. I'm not sure what that has to do with anything, but I'm thinking of like cleaning, and like maybe it has to come up, or I don't know. What else? Um, I would occasionally hear like your advice
Ah.
sometimes. Like I would be asking myself a question and then I'd hear something that I knew to just be something you would have said in as
Ah.
advice to that question. Stuff like that happened as well. Uh, Probably more, but I can't really remember all of it.
That is, it's cool to hear that. I don't think I've
I
heard
don't
of
think we've
that
talked about
before.
this really.
Yeah. So I shared with you that there would be songs that would come up when I was driving, usually on the radio, and I just knew it was from you. I knew that the lyrics in that song, uh, you were saying it to me. I just felt it. And it, it maybe happened like 4 or 5 times over those 9 weeks. Um, but there was actually one song, I can't remember the name of it, but one of the lyrics was kind of like, "Thank you for staying with me through my dark night." That
Mm.
was one of the lyrics, and that felt resonant. And of course, I was going through a dark night too. But so songs would 4 or 5 times a song would come up, and I just knew it was your energy. I could just feel it. Same thing with birds, cardinals. I'd see a cardinal, and I felt your energy. And I also did a lot of shamanic journeying and going into the Akashic records during this time. And you or your 5D self would come to me in these shamanic journeys. And I told you this story that one time you brought me a white rose and a letter in one of these journeys. And you said, "I will be around." And it felt
It's
comforting
so
that you were.
mysteriously like me to do that too. I'm around.
Yeah. And honestly, it felt like your 5D self, really, you were whispering in my ear that I am still here. Please, I am still here. I'm still here. I'm coming back. Um, that's what I felt. And yeah, I'm really grateful for those signs, because it really did help a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. One other question we have, research clue is again, do you identify with the DM and DF polarities, or do you feel like you were a good balance between the two? So I'd say that each person has a unique balance of DF, DM, like divine feminine, divine masculine energies that is sort of based on their biases accumulated through incarnations and preferences. That is their like natural balance, more balanced state. So you could think of it as a ratio of more feminine to masculine. But it can be across a whole variety of traits. And so like for us, for example, I have a bunch of masculine traits, but I also have a bunch of feminine traits. And you also have a whole bunch of masculine traits and a lot of feminine traits as well. So we both have both of these traits in abundance, I'd say.
And I think it's interesting because we've talked about that. Do you feel you maybe have even a bit of a higher percentage of feminine traits?
Yeah, I would say that naturally I'm more feminine than masculine. That a lot of my masculine that I've had to do has been a bit of a pretend
Yeah.
to fit in a little bit better with the boys, with the chums.
And on my side, I feel that I have a bit more masculine energy. And
Yeah,
that's how I sort of traversed what I had to in my
and I
life.
think that's
And
pretty typical that it'll be balanced like that a little bit.
yeah.
And there are aspects of me though that are very, very masculine, right? And so it's not like each. You could think of each like divine masculine, divine feminine, and then there's like thousands of sort of categories of how
Yes.
that energy gets used in consciousness to create experiences. Infinite, I guess, right? It's infinite. So you're essentially having various balanced. So just because I'm very far divine or masculine energy in an area doesn't mean I'm imbalanced there. It really is up to me to discern for myself what feels most natural to me and most aligned with my and most in harmony with my ability to offer service. And if I focus that way, then I get right. But then there's also a balancing harmony between the relationship. Like the relationship itself is also like a consciousness you could think of with a melding of these energies.
Yes.
And so you may notice in these live streams, you're much more like not writing down necessarily, but listing and
the organizer.
You're the organizer, and I'm more like, and that's a feminine quality to be like, pretty fun thoughts, and like that's a feminine quality. That's not a masculine trait.
I have been feeling called to nurture my divine feminine more. That's my path is to become more feminine.
And that's interesting too, that I've noticed that most of our paths here are to nurture the divine feminine more. There are men that as well that are very emasculated and need to nurture their divine masculine, of course. Those are experiences happening. But men suppress so much of their divine feminine, they don't even accept it, that it's there.
Yes.
So but they don't tend to do that with the masculine. A lot of those traits they embrace and empower. So they also have to focus on the divine feminine, and then divine feminine, they see the patriarchy and try to model the male orientation instead of going with their own unique expressions. And so they turn away from their femininity to model the male, which has been modeled in the patriarchy, right? So I think both generally are like the most typical energies to balance or to be focusing on is probably the feminine. The feminine is also where that like compassion and love comes from, right? That's where the power of the love energy is brought into the being. So opening that up more and more and accepting more and more of that will make you more compassionate, more emotional, more sensitive. And for
me, that part I think is quite open for me. For me, the aspect it seems I'm being invited to embody more is to be more in receiving mode and less doing, more being and receiving.
Yeah. Which did you say that was? More being and receiving?
Oh, that both of those orientations.
Yeah.
I feel I'm being invited to embody more.
Yeah.
You know me, I'm not much of a beer. I'm more of a doer, and I'm not much of a receiver either. So I'm
not much of a doer or a receiver. I mostly just be. I'll often just sit for like hours.
Yeah, you are a really good beer.
I'm so good at sitting on my ass.
You're so good at being.
I'm like, if they had an Olympics for it, I could do it. I could compete with some of these monks. I'm telling you.
Totally. All right, should we?
One more question.
Okay.
Seems you guys have had limited running and chasing. Would you say you guys flipped that notion on its head? Yeah, in ours, it wasn't so much a running chasing. Basically, I was going through a kind of unique experience that was sort of a what I call it integration. It's when we're trying to embody the higher self. There's two ways that we do that. Either we go for what's called I think it's called non-local, where we call the higher self on occasion for some guidance. And then the other way to do it is to have it be like a circular, ongoing integration, where then you have to balance that as well. And I was going for that type of connection with my higher self. And so as I was doing all the magical practices and preparing for that, I had to isolate myself. But
maybe I could just share the first 8 months of our relationship before we considered ourselves girlfriend, boyfriend. I wouldn't say it was a runner chaser, but I didn't seem to yet really be activated towards what was going on between us. I was hanging back a bit. And so I think that also can be a stage where one person seems pretty sure there is something really profound here, and the other person is not yet on that page.
Yeah, that could happen too, for sure.
And
so we did a bunch of that, sort of, like earlier on, I offered to come over to meet you and stuff, and you're like, oh, I'm busy. And I was like, oh, all right, well, I'm busy too. I was just being polite. I didn't even want to come.
It's so funny. I look back on that now and I'm like, oh my God, why did I say no? But I think maybe I know what was happening for me is I think there were still some things I needed to move through, probably emotionally and just logistically in my life, until I had space to even really see you.
Yeah. And same for me. I just didn't necessarily recognize that. So I was more interested in pursuing
what
a bit.
Ended up happening.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting to me too is on Thanksgiving a year ago, I did a ceremony and I really felt and expressed gratitude towards my whole life and all the time I'd had with my children. And I was letting go of this sort of yearning for my life partner to come in. And I was just really present and I felt really grateful in my life as it was. And then literally the next day, you and I did a YouTube show together. And it was literally right after the YouTube show that my eyes opened and I knew you were my person. And I think I had to go through, especially that gratitude piece, and let go of that, the lack. So I thought that was really interesting too.
Yeah. It is interesting because the reason that you can't see the partner is because you're seeing the lack of the partner. So the partner could be in your face going, hey. You
were in my face for the past 8 months trying to get my attention. You were literally, yeah. And I didn't really see it.
And, usually they aren't totally sure either what's going on.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not like I knew for sure anything crazy was going on or where this would go.
Right.
I just, I tried to just, I tried to just trust that, it was hard. It was hard for me because you seemed to like me, but then didn't seem to like me at the same time. You seemed to have both. So I had trouble going like, which one is she? Right. So I was a little, I would just pop in every now and then to check in, basically to see where things are at.
For me, it was never not liking you. It was, I really liked you, but something was not totally activated in me, I think, to think it was possible with you or to take it seriously or something.
Oh, yeah. It all makes sense. Now. So yeah, I think we didn't experience so much of a running chasing. We had a more unique experience, but there was a bit of this Because at first I was sort of, I guess you could call me the chaser and you the runner. I guess you could say
Yeah,
that.
and then the separation, I was more the chaser.
But
Yeah.
back
So I
then,
think
we
we've
didn't really
had
know.
flavors of that.
Yeah. But back, it
Yeah.
wasn't super intense for us back then because neither of us knew really what was going on. And,
Yeah.
you know, we were both pretty guarded as well,
Yeah.
getting into anything crazy. So, you know, I think both sort of took it a little slowly at the very beginning there, especially with it, on paper, us as a couple didn't make a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So it was easy to just be like, well, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? So,
And I
yeah,
think what happened was there was an immediate connection between us,
yeah,
like from the very first meet.
hmm
And it just took me at least a long time for my thinking mind to get on board. The feelings were always there, but my thinking mind just, oh, he's in Canada. He's much younger than me. He's got a lot going on in his life. He's still married. He's still living with his soon to be ex-wife. He's got very young children. So I kind of like, that how can that work? How can
yeah.
that work?
And
But the
I'm not living. I'm
feeling,
not living with her anymore.
right?
Just to be
Yes,
clear.
yes, yeah. So the feelings were always there. The huge connection was always there. And I wonder, if other twin flames have that experience too, where
Yeah,
you can feel it, but the external circumstances seem impossible.
yeah. I also think there are some that have signed up for these experiences of having what seem like multiple twin flames, where
Ah,
they they sort of they have this experience of going to different people and like breaking apart, different people breaking apart.
okay.
um
Yeah.
I think that that's a thing that some people are having as well. um I'm not sure if that was a planned thing or a result of some of the confusion of the twin flame concept causing people to project it
Yeah.
incorrectly, or what.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that happened, but I have a feeling that that's also kind of could be happening as well. So you could have an experience where like you thought that person was, and now this person is, and you know
Yes.
that type of thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
Totally.
um, should we go on to the next?
Yeah. Number 5. Do you want to take care of that one?
Yeah, you come back together, both expanded, and you start to establish unconditional love, acceptance, and trust. So yeah, unconditional trust is what sort of makes the safe area for you to do the rest of the work that you're going to do with each other. um like most the primary focus of your relationship, really, whether you want it to be or not, is going to end up likely being whoops, excuse me, spiritual development, expansion of consciousness, and self-healing. So either forming new concepts that give you broader insight to the world as it's formed and your reality and all these things, or things about yourself, or expanding in ways of healing aspects of yourself that you had repressed or weren't accepting. And so, but before you can really do that properly or deeply with each other, the unconditional trust has to be there, because basically, if you don't trust the person, you're not going to say your vulnerable things, because you're going to worry that it's going to cause an issue, or so that's one of the things that I work on, is because I've often gotten a whole bunch of trouble for speaking my truth, and it's been fairly unsafe to do that.
Yeah.
People get offended quite easily,
Yeah.
is what I sort of learned. And so I can be a little careful of that. So I'm trying to adjust that and sort of just trust that I don't have to do that. Um, what do you think?
Yeah. And this stage has been heavenly, to experience a relationship where there is unconditional love, acceptance, and trust. It feels like my first experience in a relationship like that in the human realm.
Mm-hmm.
My dogs, maybe I had that relationship already, but not with a human.
I think it's huge for us because even with our parents, we don't establish unconditional trust because we are not, the love that we receive from them to us doesn't feel unconditional. Yes. We receive love and praise when we abide by the rules, and when we don't, we receive punishment, or depending on the severity of it, it can be quite bad, right? But even small punishments, like kids are sensitive, they're innocent, they have no idea they're doing anything wrong. So if they even seem upset about it as they say it to the kid, can take that very personally, right? And so those form early on. And so we haven't generally experienced unconditional love from somebody.
Exactly. For most beings on this planet.
And it's difficult to do it. The only way to truly do it with somebody is to have them also be aware of these processes, these sort of inner workings that we're doing.
And I like to use the word dojo. It becomes this just training space, a very safe, loving training space to really just see what's going on inside and be more vulnerable and share things that I've shared so many things with you that I've never shared with anyone, that I would have been too embarrassed to share. So it has just, I think the personal growth has been exponential during this period. Well, the whole thing.
I think a lot of that, we're like testing. We're like, will they still love me if...
Can I really say this? Can I really share this?
Can I do this too, or say this too? Yeah. Can I share this too?
And we have had a lot of intense experiences that could have been maybe very embarrassing for one of us. That almost seemed to be orchestrated in a way for us to really understand, oh yeah, that's okay too. Yeah. She's not leaving yet. He's not leaving. There really is unconditional trust here. Yeah. One
more, we have another question. Any advice on how to have a smooth parting of ways with the karmic? So lucky for you, friend, Dr. Tassel is a licensed marriage and family therapist. And, most of those relationships I'd say are karmic. And she is the reason I knew how to do that. And I think I've told you that without you modeling it for me, I wouldn't really have known of the possibility of a sort of fairly peaceful separation or splitting up. I know that you had initially a very troubled one or a problematic one. It was lots of conflict and stuff. But towards the end, you were able to smooth all that over. And now I know you guys get along very well. And we went out to was it Cheesecake Factory? And
all together with my ex-husband and all the kids.
Yeah, and so you could, it's very modern, I guess, and inclusive. And if you were here and my ex was around, like, we would probably do something similar.
Oh, do you think that will happen? That's cool.
Eventually, yeah. I mean, you'd have to come up.
I love that.
You'd have to get the fascists to let you in.
Yeah.
but basically it's difficult because it's unique for each relationship, but what I would say is communication. And even though you may be the one who's experiencing most of the disharmony and wanting to leave, trying to hold space for their upsetness, their emotion and their, like, how they're handling it all. It doesn't need to be about all the things they've done to you to get it to this point. It doesn't need to be a battle. You can both get to a place where you just agree that it's better for us to go separate ways. The issue is that a lot of the unconscious behavior of humans is misremembered. The mind remembers it in the way that adheres to the narrative that the mind believes. So the brain will adjust the happenings literally and the colors of things, and it changes everything, right? And so even when you're saying you did this and this and this, they probably don't even remember. And so staying out of all of that stuff, trying to be honest and like basically share that that's your goal, is to have a peaceful sort of separation, and then try not to like nitpick over small things, like if you're separating and you're deciding who's gonna get what and all that type of stuff, like just try to be oriented towards doing what is best for everybody involved, especially if you have kids, like trying to make the focus on what's best for the kids, without judging the other person to the degree of like, well, they don't know how to take care of the kids alone, so I'm going to take my kids away because it's best for the kids. Try not to go down those routes, because that's all that's going to cause is it to be just crazy, because people are going to fight for their kids and you're just asking for like stuff like to go bananas. And to be truthful, what is probably best for their kids is equal parts time, providing the other partner isn't like abusive or like really, really negligent and stuff like that. But the kids probably want equal parts time, right? So if that can be arranged, just what's fair to everybody, what serves everyone, try to be oriented that way, try to get them on board with that. You may have people that won't, and all you can really do, a good technique, Ho'oponopono, you hold them in your mind's eye, just say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, over and over, holding them in your mind's eye, just basically sending them good energy. That can help to just, when they the way that works is when they start to think of you, there's a possibility that positivity can influence how they then approach things later, is how I believe that functions. But anyway, I'm sure you have a bunch of stuff you could say. I mean, we've both been through it and have done pretty well, I'd say, for ourselves.
Yes, and I'll just briefly say that I went from the absolute most nightmarish, worst of times scenario with my ex-husband. And as you shared, I think we have an amazing divorce now. And I love everything you said. And I think you said it very beautifully, this orientation of highest and best for all involved. And I will fess up, that was not my orientation in the beginning. I didn't have many models of this, and I just drew from really the mainstream narrative of divorce as a battle. And I've got to fight him, I've got to fight for my kids and all that business. And maybe we could do a whole show on this, because it was quite a journey that I went through around all of this. But I landed on highest and best for all, and that is what brought peace and a beautiful resolution to my situation. And I also want to say, like I say for every situation, feel all of your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And if it feels appropriate, encourage the other person to feel all of their feelings. That's how I got to a place of forgiveness. It took a while, but it works. Yeah. It really works. But please, if anyone wants more assistance with this, please reach out to me or Sean through the doctorandthewizard.com website. There's a way to contact us on there. And I have so much compassion for anyone going through any type of breakup like that. And there are ways to move through very peacefully.
As we hold an honest intention for highest and best for everyone, it's very difficult for other people to fight against that, because that's what the universe sort of naturally wants to have unfold. And so if you're honest and with your intentions and your voice, you defend yourself when your boundaries are getting pushed, but not in a way that's defensive, just in a way that's saying, you know, like, you know, I don't feel that seems like it's highest and best for everybody. It seems like this is unfair to me, just like this would be unfair to you. Let's go orient towards fairness and highest and best.
Yeah, and basically whatever energy you're holding, you are going to see that reflected back with the other person. And in the beginning of my divorce, I was holding battle energy.
Yep.
And that's what was coming at me. He was battling me. And really, as I used the phrase to him, I called my ex-husband one night and I said, I'm laying down my sword and I want peace with you. And I want whatever is the highest and best for both of us and the children. And he was immediately on board. Yeah. I laid down my sword and then he laid down his sword. So we can have such beautiful outcomes like that when we cultivate that peace within us, and then we're going to see it in the other person. Most
people have a very difficult time fighting peace. Gandhi showed us that, right?
Totally. Totally.
It's hard to fight peace. So if you can bring peace, do that, and that's what's probably going to unfold.
I think it'd be great to do a show around this.
Totally.
There's a lot to be shared.
Okay. We were on you're now in a safe container, but I think we said that already when we were talking about unconditional love as the container. So the last one.
Yeah. I think what maybe just the point here is that your growth is just going to keep continuing. And I guess we already said that, but I think it's just helpful even for me to remember that we've come together now in a very peaceful, safe way, but my growth is still ongoing. There's still stuff coming up.
Yeah.
And I think, so maybe just the last step number 7.
Yep. I think that's for you.
Okay. You realize wholeness within yourself. So Sean, yesterday you said something like the twin flame journey is truly just about coming back to yourself. And that does seem to be the goal. It is a spiritual journey of coming back to yourself and your divine connection, and really knowing that you are everything you need. And just the peace that comes with that. And
it doesn't mean that relationship doesn't matter. It's like through that relationship that you come to places with the level of acceptance that you need to be able to properly go there with somebody safely. And so without them, you would have a much harder time seeing yourself to the depth that you're trying to. So it's like you it's a way to learn how to see unity, essentially. Is how I see it, and that's sort of where it ends in this I guess density, is in unity that falls away. And
I would say that in step number 6, I'm still in that process. I think at times I'm really feeling wholeness and unity. At times it's a little more challenging for me to completely feel that. So for me, I'm working step number 7.
What I've noticed with unity, or perceiving unity, is that the best way I can describe it is because the mind can't wrap itself around infinity, because the mind can only conceptualize manyness, but manyness is finite, right? So it can't conceive of infinity properly. And so unity is more like a feeling or a knowing and a faith in this density, because the veil is too much stuff's veiled, and so you can't properly see it here in this dimension and density. But what ends up happening is the faith and that feeling of it is what you start to get oriented around. And so it becomes more like a knowing of it. Yeah.
And that lines up with what you have shared with me about third density, that the goal is not understanding. The goal is choosing love and faith. So just what you said.
So I'll go through it again, because I love to just share this because it's really important. The third density is the choice. This is where we learn how we're going to love. Are we going to love ourselves, or are we going to love other selves? Mm-hmm. That's really what we're choosing. Service to self is love of self. It's becoming an expert in loving yourself to a degree that you're seeing yourself as better than and separate from all others. And then the other way is expressing your love to others and sharing it in vibration, or and the reason you can see there's no polarity between these two is you could think of them as negative and positive electrical currents. In order for consciousness to do work, you need both, right, for something to occur. Mm-hmm. And one is not, you're not going to look at the negative pole of a magnet and say, oh, that pole is worse than the positive pole. The negative pole pulls in, and the positive pole travels to or radiates. So yeah, positivity radiates and negativity absorbs. But what I was trying to say was, in the third density, it's you're trying to choose. It's the density of choice, and the choice is, how am I going to love? Am I going to love myself or love others? Once we choose that, and then polarize 51% service to others and graduate to the next density, that's when we are in the density of love and understanding. And that's the density where we're starting to understand what just occurred, basically, in the whole illusory third density matrix that we were in. We're able to look at that almost like looking through a storybook of moments in our lives that we can see from a place where we can see all of the interactions that, as the human, were veiled to us. The neighbors chatting beside us, and some of the things that they said that influenced some of or their energy that influenced us, and different things like that. We can see all of that, and so we can start to understand stuff because we can truly see it from outside of the illusion. And that's what happens at each stage. Each stage is a different, more expanded view of the illusion. And so the next density is wisdom. So that's where wisdom gets applied to the love and understanding. They start to understand how the reality works. Then they apply wisdom to it to learn how to be of best service. Then they come into unity. And that's where the negative path realizes basically it can't polarize any further. And it will usually, after a period of like frustration and just being confused, it will switch its polarity and move into the positive.
Beautiful.
Thank you. But yeah, so we're never going to understand anything fully.
Yeah.
We can have some ideas and some concepts. And so it's important to just know that so innately that, like, every time someone says something to you, you just run it through your own discernment. Like, does that make sense? Could it be that way? Don't block out anything. Keep a very open mind. We live in an infinite universe. There are infinite possibilities. If somebody says they saw a pink unicorn in their backyard, they probably did.
I think this is from the Law of One. The universe begins and ends in mystery.
The universe begins and ends in mystery. And in unity, all paradoxes are resolved.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Seems like a good place to end.
It does. It does. I like that's a funny thing. So Ra makes a joke in the Law of One about well, not Ra, actually. The questioner makes a joke and says that they don't they don't believe that Ra can count past one because Ra constantly gets numbers wrong and stuff like that. And I was thinking about it from sixth density perspective when we can't really see time properly. You can't count past one. You can't count past the now.
Yeah,
It's just funny. It's funny all the stuff that that happens with as the perception changes.
Sixth density humor.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us in the Twin Flame Stages Explained episode. And maybe I'll just quickly say that our intention is to be here Monday through Friday at noon Eastern. So that's our intention.
I think I'm going to start scheduling the stream. So you should see them show up, get notifications. You can schedule to watch it when we go live if you'd like to.
Yes.
And stuff like that. We're going to try to make that work. So.
And then starting next week, we're also planning to put together a really great video course on Twin Flame Divine Union, where we go more in depth into all of this and practices that we think could be helpful in yours. Yeah. Awesome.
We have one question. Is karmic a behavior or an energy behavior? I'm not sure that I understand that. Is karmic like karmic activities, or is it the energy? You know what? Maybe try to rewrite that, put that in the comments, and I'll see if I can get an answer for that.
Yeah, we can answer that maybe tomorrow.
I'm not sure that I understand the difference or the question. But yeah, if you want to try reading in the comments, we can answer it.
Yeah, or any other questions or topics that you're interested in, please, we'd love to know.
Yep.
And sending everyone so much love. We are all so one, brothers and sisters on this planet.
All right.
All right, see you tomorrow.
Bye.